On February 7, 2025, the world watched as President Trump signed an executive order that sent shockwaves across the globe. This order, citing humanitarian concerns, prioritized the resettlement of Afrikaners from South Africa into the United States. The move was met with a mixture of confusion and outrage, with many questioning the validity of the claims and the potential ramifications of such a decision. For South Africa, a nation still grappling with its own complex history, the order felt like a step backward. It reopened old wounds and raised questions about sovereignty and international relations in a new era. This executive order did not appear in a vacuum. It came on the heels of escalating tensions between the United States and South Africa. President Trump, known for his direct approach to foreign policy, had previously clashed with the South African government on various issues: trade disagreements, differing stances on climate change, and South Africa's growing relationship with China all contributed to the strained relationship. The executive order, therefore, seemed to many like the culmination of these growing tensions, a bold and perhaps reckless move on the global stage. The order itself focused on the plight of the Afrikaner minority in South Africa. Citing reports of violence, discrimination, and what it called land grabs, the Trump administration argued that the Afrikaner population was facing persecution. They pointed to South Africa's Expropriation Act, which allows for the government to expropriate land for public use, as evidence of this alleged persecution. This act, however, was designed to address the legacy of apartheid and promote land redistribution to black South Africans who were dispossessed of their land during the apartheid era. The Trump administration, however, framed the act as a discriminatory measure aimed at disenfranchising white South Africans. The executive order further accused the South African government of fostering a climate of hatred against Afrikaners, alleging that they were being targeted for their race and heritage. These accusations were met with strong denials from the South African government, which defended its policies as necessary measures to address historical injustices and promote equality. The executive order did not solely focus on resettlement. It also announced a significant cut in aid to South Africa. This move was presented as a form of punishment for what the Trump administration deemed as the South African government's failure to protect its citizens. The aid cuts were primarily directed towards programs focused on HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment, a move that drew widespread condemnation from international health organizations. The Trump administration defended the aid cuts, arguing that the South African government was mismanaging funds and that the money would be better spent elsewhere. They insisted that the cuts were not intended to harm the South African people, but rather to hold their government accountable. However, critics argued that the cuts would have a devastating impact on vulnerable populations in South Africa, particularly those reliant on US-funded healthcare programs. The most controversial aspect of the executive order was undoubtedly the prioritization of Afrikaners for resettlement in the United States. The order directed the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security to expedite the processing of Afrikaner asylum claims and grant them preferential treatment under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. This move was seen by many as a blatant attempt to cater to a specific racial group and a complete disregard for the plight of other refugees from around the world who were also seeking asylum in the United States. The Trump administration, however, maintained that their actions were purely humanitarian. They argued that the Afrikaners were facing a dire situation in South Africa and that the United States had a moral obligation to provide them with refuge. They insisted that their actions were not based on race, but rather on a commitment to protecting those facing persecution. This argument, however, failed to resonate with many, who saw the executive order as a clear example of racial bias and a dangerous precedent in international relations. The international community reacted to the executive order with a mixture of shock and condemnation. The United Nations issued a statement expressing deep concern over the order, calling it discriminatory and counterproductive. The African Union condemned the order as an affront to the spirit of Pan-Africanism and accused the United States of meddling in the internal affairs of a sovereign nation. Several world leaders also voiced their disapproval of the executive order. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called it a step in the wrong direction and reaffirmed Canada's commitment to supporting South Africa's democratic institutions. French President Emmanuel Macron accused the United States of undermining international law and the principles of racial equality. The executive order further isolated the United States on the world stage, straining relationships with key allies and undermining its credibility as a global leader. Within the United States, the executive order sparked fierce debate and protests. Civil rights groups condemned the order as racist and discriminatory, arguing that it prioritized one group of people based solely on their race. They accused the Trump administration of using the plight of the Afrikaners to advance a white nationalist agenda, and warned that the order would embolden white supremacist groups both domestically and abroad. The move also raised concerns about the future of U.S. immigration policy. Critics argued that the prioritization of Afrikaners for resettlement would come at the expense of other refugees who were equally deserving of protection. They accused the Trump administration of turning its back on the world's most vulnerable populations and abandoning its commitment to upholding human rights. As the dust settles on this controversial executive order, many questions remain unanswered. The practical implications of resettling a significant number of Afrikaners in the United States are complex and multifaceted. Issues such as housing, employment, and social integration will need to be addressed. The potential strain on social services and the risk of a backlash from certain segments of American society cannot be ignored. The long-term impact on U.S.-South Africa relations is also uncertain. The executive order has undoubtedly damaged the relationship between the two countries, and it remains to be seen whether and how this damage can be repaired. The aid cuts will have a tangible impact on South Africa's ability to address critical issues, potentially undermining its development progress. The executive order has also ignited a debate about the legacy of apartheid and the meaning of racial justice in a globalized world. It has forced a conversation about the responsibility of nations to protect vulnerable populations within their borders and the limits of international intervention. The order stands as a stark reminder of the enduring power of race and identity in shaping global politics. The story of Afrikaner resettlement in the United States is still being written. It is a story fraught with uncertainty, controversy, and the potential for both promise and peril. Only time will tell how this unprecedented move will reshape the social and political landscape of both nations and the world at large.